Hi guys, Sandy from the Paddle School. In this video today, we're going to talk about when you should be changing your racket. Now this is something that we get asked a lot. Players get different kind of cracks in the face of the racket or the frame, and they want to know if they're still able to use it. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to care for your racket, but also the different types of cracks you can get and which ones you can play with and which ones you would need to change the racket. To begin with, we'll talk about racket care. Now there's a few different things that you can do on the court and off the court to help your racket last longer. The first is to put a protective strip on the top of the racket. Now that just protects from scrapes and bangs when you're on the court, and a lot of the brands, they come with them when you buy them from the shop, but also you can see that sometimes it does peel off, and if that does happen, then you can always replace it. You can buy them separately from shops and you just put them over the top of the racket, and that will protect you from a certain amount of damage while you're on the court. Another way to protect the racket off court is to have a bag or sleeve that you can put the racket in. Now I know that might sound obvious, but so many players just throw the racket in the boot of the car and there it's getting scraped up. If you can put it in a bag or a sleeve, that will protect particularly the outer surface of that racket. It's important to protect your rackets from environmental conditions. Now, if you're playing in the rain and your rackets get wet, you just want to make sure that you're able to dry them out. It won't damage them too much, but you don't want them to stay wet for long, yeah? So don't leave it in the sleeve when it's already wet. You want to kind of leave it out so it can dry. The main one though is the heat. If it's a hot summer's day, you don't want to leave your racket in your car, for example, because there it's almost like a little oven and it will damage the material inside the racket. And I've seen brand new rackets that have been left in their car for 2 or 3 hours and the responsiveness of the racket changes completely because of the damage that it's doing to those materials. And this is obviously important where I'm living now in Dubai, but it's the same for anyone. Anyone in a summer's day when it gets hot, just remember to take your racket out of your car because that is probably the biggest factor for damaging the material in your racket. When you buy a racket, the first thing you should do, really before you even leave the shop, if it is a physical shop, is check the racket. Check there are no scratches, no scrapes, nothing wrong with the racket. The same with when you receive it from a delivery. Just check everything, because if you want to return it or you want to kind of make a claim that there's something wrong with the racket, you need to do that immediately. It's no good if you've kept it for a few days because you could have played with that and the shop are not going to know. So when you get a racket, just give it a once over, checking everything that it seems fine to play with before you actually play with it for the first time. So now we'll look at a few different types of cracks. The first one, which is not normally a problem for playing, is the kind of cosmetic ones that are really only in the paint. And that's something that you get little chips and it doesn't make a big difference how you play. And sometimes you get this kind of internal crack around the face of the racket, and this is something that if it's just in the paint, in the very surface, and you can only see a very fine line, then usually it's fine to play with it. It's not going to be a problem. It becomes a problem when you see a deeper crack, and the next one we're going to look at will be in the racket face here. This has often come from hitting a hard aggressive smash or hitting something, you know, very hard, or often you see players doing it on their knee or on their foot, but this is where you get a crack between the holes. And what happens there is basically that layer of carbon that is holding the racket together gets a split in it. So here, that's a problem then, because you can even feel with your finger that that area on your racket is softer and you can push further into the racket. So particularly that side of the racket will be compromised. You could probably play with the other side of the racket, but the side with the crack on the face, you won't be able to hit the ball as well as you would like to once that crack appears. The more serious cracks are the ones that you get on the frame of the racket, usually at the top here, somewhere like that. And normally what's happened is it started by either you clashing rackets with your partner or when you hit the glass or the ground or something like that. And they tend to gradually grow. It might start as a small crack, but then you can see that it will go through the racket and it will go almost through that center line. And the nice thing about paddle rackets, unlike breaking a string in tennis where you can probably play 3 or 4 more shots before you lose complete control, in paddle you can probably play with that racket for quite a lot longer before you start to notice a difference in the play. But when you get this crack in the top here, it's only a matter of time until this racket will be compromised. Now, there's a little trick that if it is a small crack and it's kind of a hairline crack that's gone through the paint, but it's also gone through that first layer of material, at the beginning you can try and put a little bit of super glue in there if it's a small crack, and that will hold it together a little bit. But as soon as you start to see a crack developing, you know it's time to start looking for another racket, because you know this racket's days are numbered. When a racket cracks and you do that first bit of damage to the racket, it's actually quite a distinct sound. It's almost like a kind of tree branch snapping, that you contact the ground or your partner's racket and you can immediately hear that you've done some damage to the racket. The other thing is that when you're playing over time, if you're using the same racket, over time it will get softer. Yeah, so what starts out as being a kind of hard responsive racket, over time will get softer and softer. So you just need to be aware that when it reaches a point that you feel like you're not getting that responsiveness, that's also a time for you to look for a different racket. Now, if you play competitively, I definitely recommend having two of the same racket in your bag. And with those two rackets, keep playing with both of them so they're about the similar level. So then if you do crack a racket during a match, you can switch rackets and you're not going to notice a big difference. If you're at the beginner or kind of playing a recreational game, then it's not such a big issue. Like I said, if you do get a bit of a crack, you can continue that game and then look for a new racket afterwards. Players are always asking us how long a racket should last, and this is a really difficult question to answer because there's so many factors. It depends on the type of racket, the quality of the racket, how often you're playing, the power at which you're using when you are playing, the conditions that you're playing in. There are so many different factors. I would say that you should probably change your racket when you feel like it's affecting your game. So either there's a crack in it and you can see that that crack is growing and you know it means the racket is compromised and therefore it's not going to give you as good a results, or you've been playing for a long time and it's got softer and you don't feel like you're using it the way you were when you first got it. Or you might find that you're playing with a racket and your game develops and you want to change rackets for that reason. Either way, I would let your game be the one that is deciding how long you use a racket, rather than saying, right, I'm going to use this for a certain period of time. If you found this video useful, please share it, because I know there's a lot of players out there that want to know when they should be changing their racket. Now on this side, I'm going to put how to test a racket, so you know what you should be doing when you go and you test your rackets on the court, and also what you should be looking for when you're choosing a racket, because those two videos will help you make your next racket selection.